Hi, I'm Leo, this is Crash Course Jenkins. So today we are starting to learn what Jenkins is, how to use it, how to leverage its capabilities for different tasks. So first of all, what Jenkins is? Let's see the documentation. Jenkins is a self-contained open-source automation server which can be used to automate all sorts of tasks related to building, testing, and developing or deploying software. The first thing you're going to ask is, why do we want to use a separate server for our automations if all the cloud providers and version control servers already have a built-in one? Well, I'm glad you asked. GitLab CI, GitHub Actions, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, they all provide some sort of development assistance tools to build your code, to test it, to deploy it, maybe, I don't know. But none of those can do all the things that Jenkins can. Because, well, what can Jenkins do? Literally anything. You can give it any executable, you can give it any command, and it will run it without asking any questions. Jenkins can run everything you want it to with the right configuration, and that's the beauty of it. It's a standalone server. It's not bound to any cloud. It's not bound to any architecture or paradigm or anything. You are creating those jobs. You are creating those pipelines. Well, sounds very promising, right? So what do we need to install it? First, we're going to need to decide how do we want to install it, because if we consult the same piece of documentation, Jenkins can be installed through native system packages, Docker, or even run standalone by any machine with Java runtime environment installed. Well, that means that we can just use the old way of like systemd or running it on a Windows as an executable and be done with it, right? Nope. If you want your Jenkins installation to run different tasks on different clouds with different languages, you do not want to install it on the machine. It's easy, don't get me wrong, it's the most appealing way to install it. But if you wanted to, for example, build some Java projects or build Docker images, you need to provide it with capabilities to do so. So you need Maven installed on your machine, you need Docker installed on your machine. And for Docker, most importantly, the Jenkins user must have access to the Docker socket so that it can run Docker commands. Otherwise, it will not do anything. You can even give Jenkins sudo rights. What could possibly go wrong, right? The other option is to run it in Docker. Spoiler alert, that's what we are going to do. Why? Well, because in Docker container, we are not leaking anything from Jenkins to our host environment. Also, inside this container, Jenkins can do whatever. Well, for instance, if some developer writes a pipeline that calculates, say, 9,000 factorial, it will not freeze our system. It will freeze Jenkins, of course, but it's easily restartable. Yeah, and there's also a portability issue. If we run things in Docker, we can easily move them between hosts without really breaking a sweat. Because honestly, I've been there. We had a Jenkins host that was dedicated for building stuff. It had all the necessary executables, all the necessary runtimes to build all the things in a project. It is easy to use for a user. It's a nightmare to administer. It's impossible to update anything without breaking anything else. And yeah, it's nearly impossible to move. Well, because after you have about 1,000 jobs doing different things on different versions of Maven, Node, etc., you can't really easily move them onto another host. I did try it and failed miserably, which is why we are running it in Docker. So how do we install it in Docker? Let's check the same documentation. It gives us instructions on how to install Docker. I really much hope everyone can do it by now. Then there's an extensive list of instructions on how to configure everything you need to run this Docker. So here are the Docker commands: Docker run, Docker network create, another Docker run. Everything is explained. Wonderful. But if you're anything like me and you do not trust your memory, you do not ever type Docker run. You always want to use Docker compose for such things. Just because if this container stops or the host dies, you're lost. You don't have it anymore. So the Docker Compose is a handy utility that can leverage a single YAML file that stores all information about our container. Well, naturally, we want to commit it into a version control system, so we will have all our revisions, etc., etc., etc. More on that later. So let's go and write this Docker Compose file and run our Jenkins. So here we are, and we need to install our Jenkins in a Docker container. Alright, so going over the same documentation, we're skipping everything here and go to installing Jenkins, So here are the instructions on how to run everything on Mac or Linux. I'm going to use a Linux machine. I have a fresh Ubuntu installation here. All it has is Docker installed, and that's pretty much it. So now here we can see that we need to create a network for our Jenkins. We need a couple of volumes, naturally. I'll explain everything a bit later. And here are our run commands. But again, we do not want to run anything with Docker. We want to preserve it for later. Yeah, so let's get this Docker run command and move it to a compose file. So any compose file starts with a version. Let's say we want version 2, just for compatibility and also because I remember how to write it from scratch. We want to declare our services. So the service we want to run is going to be Jenkins. It is going to be made of several things. Name, Jenkins Blue Ocean. I will just name it Jenkins without adding any Blue Ocean stuff. Container name, Jenkins. RM and detach, we are skipping those because they're just to run it quickly and dirty. Network Jenkins. All right, let's reference a network called Jenkins. Next, we are going to specify some environment variables, but we'll discuss this in a minute. What we do need for sure is to publish port 8080 and 5000. Well, of course, we can map them to anywhere we want, but we'll just keep it simple and use the same ones. So here are 2 ports. We need 2 ports because one of them is used to access web console and to contact REST API, and the 50,000 is a port used by remote agents. We'll talk about them in future videos. Next stop, we need volumes. Here I will go easy and just create a Docker volume for this and call it Jenkins data. Yes, why not? We want to specify volume Jenkins data to map to var Jenkins home. Yes. And of course, we'll need all this necessary stuff like image. Image is Jenkins CI Blue Ocean. Well, I personally do not use Blue Ocean plugin, but it's there and it's not asking us for anything, so let it stay. And restart, we want it unless stopped, so that it will actually restart if it dies on its own accord, but it will not try to do so if we kill it manually. And we will do this. Now, we have specified a network here called Jenkins, so we need to create it. And we also, of course, want it to be external so that it is accessible from outside this host. Also, we've referenced a volume. Let's create one. And it's just a simple Docker volume. It's not backed up by anything, so we can just do that. Of course, if you build in a production system, you want this Jenkins home to be backed up by some separate volume that you are backing up, or maybe it's an array, or maybe it's a cloud volume, or whatever. But here, for purposes of this demonstration, I'm not really concerned about losing this data since we are not going to be doing much. Well, and that's it. Let us try to run this stuff. Docker compose up -d for detach, so we can actually. And yes, I forgot to mention, this is an external network, so it must be created manually, which we are going to do right now. With Docker network create Jenkins. And it did. Now let's go Docker compose up. It's gonna pull our images and hopefully run our Jenkins installation. Let's check our containers, and here we go. Now we're going to go to the browser. Let's check the IP address of this machine. It's this one. So we want to go that thing, port 8080. Yep. And it wants us to unlock it with an admin password. We want to read this file from inside the container. With the Docker exec, we want to run a command, sh-command cat this file. And here is our administrator password. Do you like it? Yes, you do. All right, for now we're going to install suggested plugins, and that's about it. It installs a bunch of useless stuff, but we don't care about it, at least for now. we are going to be talking about plugins later in the future videos. I have a thing or two planned about plugins. It offers us to create a first admin user, let's call it Wilson. Password will be an easy one. Full name is Wilson, and the email is also Wilson at something. So we want to save and continue. Jenkins URL, yes, looks like it. And start using Jenkins, yes, thank you. So here we have our purely virgin clean Jenkins. It can do a bunch of stuff. We can create a freestyle project. Let's do that. And we can already do something with it. We have quite a bit of build steps. There is Windows batch command, execute shell, invoke can't, invoke Gradle. There's some integration with Jira already. Maven targets. But the easiest thing we can do is to execute shell. Let's write a mandatory hello world. Save and build now. And it's already done. Let's see the log. And here, you see, this is our hello world. Yeah, by the way, a little trick. You can press on this arrow and it gives you everything about this build. Or you can just click on this blue ball and it automatically gives you to the log. Well, so that is a system we can already work with. But if we try to change this, and for example, instead of hello world, we want to do some Docker commands, something like that. We press build now and it failed. Why? Because it can't connect to the Docker daemon. And this is quite right. We ran our Jenkins in a container. It doesn't have a Docker socket inside. So we are going to have to remedy that. And this is exactly why we were given this container called Jenkins Docker. Let's add it to our compose file. Now, this is only useful if you want to run Docker commands on this host. If you do not use Docker for your builds for some reason, or if you want to delegate Docker builds to other hosts, we'll talk about agents in the future videos. You can skip this part and not configure this Docker container. So, apart from Jenkins service, we are going to have another one. It's going to be called Jenkins Docker. The container name, what is it just? Oh, right, Jenkins Docker, yes. Let's just copy paste it. It's easy and sensible. It must be privileged. That's also good to remember because it will attach to the Docker socket on our host. You may wonder, why don't we just map Docker socket straight to Jenkins? Well, because we don't want to allow Jenkins to be root on our host system, which is why we are running separate container that actually can run privileged commands, that can authenticate to the Docker socket, but it's limited to that, so that Jenkins does not have access to anything else in our system. And that's basically the same thing, network Jenkins, and yeah, let's copy paste that, networks Jenkins, but here we want to give it an alias. Again, that's the recommendation from our official documentation, and we want to respect that. Alias will be Docker, so that our main Jenkins container can actually refer to this Docker container as a Docker hostname. You see what they're doing here? Docker host is TCP, Docker on this port. Now this Docker word will resolve within Docker's DNS to address of the container that we are right now creating. So we've created an alias. We need a couple of volumes. The first volume will be the same Jenkins data so that they can share information between each other. And we'll need to create another. We'll create them below in the minute. And for now, we are just copy pasting all day long. We must specify environment variables. Those will be Docker TLS certs dir. That's a directory where certificates from Docker daemon will be stored. So we can actually authenticate against this Docker socket. Otherwise, it will not allow us to do anything. And yeah, you can actually open up the Docker socket for everyone to see and use, but that's somewhat not secure. And then we want to publish a port 20 23, what is it? 76. 2376 to 2376. And of course, an image will be, what is it called? Docker dint. And restart again, unless stopped. So we have added a volume. So now we must create it right here. Luckily, it's quite easy to do with our approach. But we also have to specify some more stuff in our main Jenkins container. As you can see, the thing has another mapping. That's our Docker certificates. Also, we see some environment variables appearing here, all related to connection to Docker engine. So let's add them. They are going to be right here. Environment Docker. The path is the same thing that we've just mapped, and Docker TLS verify, so that it actually verifies our certificate so we can authenticate. Now, that appears to be everything. Let's save this and run our Docker Compose again. What is wrong? Of course, I made a typo. It's not alias. It should be aliases, because they can be multiple. Now, if we Docker Compose up, yeah, and of course, that's the, that actually makes perfect sense, just because it's aliases and, well, it's plural, so therefore it must be an array. Yeah, that looks fine. And here we go. Finally, all the typos are corrected, all the stupid shenanigans right in it, and we have our containers. Really? Do we? Yes, we do. They actually are running seemingly perfectly. Okay, let us check our Jenkins. It is getting ready to work, so let's give him a minute. Oh, already. Let's log in. It's the same installation. The Jenkins home folder is actually preserved, of course. That's why we created a volume. And let's try that again. And here you go, the Docker pull completed, which means that we can do anything with our Docker daemon. We can pull things, we can build things, we can push things, and we can run things. If you want to get really fancy, you can even build Docker images and run everything inside them. That has been done. That is actually quite a common practice, just not to clutter our main system. But here you go. That's quite a usable system. We can already do a lot with this Jenkins, and it's not even configured in any way. And we already can build stuff. There is one particular configuration menu I wanted to talk about. It's the global tool configuration. Jenkins is actually quite cool regarding that you can, from the UI, install, for example, Java. What do we want? We want Java JDK 8. Let's install the latest Java. We want to call it J9, for example. I agree. So let's apply, and the next time we run a Java project, it will actually install the necessary Java installation, the one that we use in our project, and it will run it. And the same goes for most other tooling. We can add more here later if we want to, and yes, I think we will eventually. Well, here you go. That's our Jenkins. And that is it for today. We have our Jenkins, we can build stuff, and the next time we'll talk about agents and how to delegate builds and commands to other hosts. I've been Leo. See ya!